I'm sure you've heard the news. Loneliness is not just your problem, it's ours. Despite all the hustle and bustle, despite the constant noise of modern life and the thousands of connections we have on social media, you're not the only one who feels alone. Right now, millions of people around the world are feeling exactly the same. Loneliness, surprisingly, has become one of the most widespread issues of our time. But here's the thing. Loneliness isn't just your problem, it's becoming our problem. A societal problem. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How it happens, why it happens, what it's doing to us, and most importantly, what we can do about it. And before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the community. Let's explore the what-ifs of life together and tackle real-world issues head-on. If you find this video meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and comment, because you never know, someone else might need this message right now. You need to hear this if you're feeling lonely. Loneliness is more than just being alone. It's that gut feeling of being emotionally disconnected even in a crowd, even when you're surrounded by people. It's feeling like no one really sees you, or worse, like no one really cares. And here's the truth, it's not just you, it's happening everywhere, across different countries, cultures, and age groups. In the United States, a study by Stigma found that over 60% of adults report feeling lonely at least some of the time. In Japan, the term hikikomori has been coined to describe people who live in extreme isolation, sometimes for years. The Japanese government estimates that over 1 million people fall into this category, with a growing number of older adults dying alone, a phenomenon known as kodokushi. In the UK, loneliness is so significant that in 2018 they appointed the world's first minister for loneliness. A government study revealed that 9 million people in Britain feel often or always lonely. Even in relatively small countries like Sweden, known for their high quality of life, loneliness is pervasive, particularly among the elderly and immigrants. It doesn't matter if you're living in a bustling metropolis like New York or Tokyo, or a quiet village in the countryside. The truth is, loneliness can strike anyone, anywhere. But where did this epidemic come from? Why are we feeling so disconnected when we've never been more connected? You need to watch this if you struggle with loneliness. So why are we so lonely? It turns out there isn't just one cause. It's a complex web of factors, from how our societies are structured to our increasing dependence on technology. Let's break it down. Let's start with technology. The very thing designed to keep us connected may actually be making us feel more isolated. Social media gives us the illusion of connection, but in reality, it often leaves us feeling inadequate. Studies like one conducted by the University of Pennsylvania have found a direct correlation between increased social media use and higher levels of loneliness and depression. Why? Because instead of fostering genuine interactions, we're left comparing ourselves to the highlight reels of other people's lives. Psychologist Jean Twenger, author of iGen, highlights how Gen Z, those born into the digital age, are experiencing record levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness, despite being the most connected generation in history. Big cities can be some of the loneliest places in the world. In megacities like Tokyo, New York, and Berlin, the anonymity that comes with living in large populations can lead to isolation. You're surrounded by people, but the sense of community isn't always there. Studies show that people in urban areas are more likely to experience chronic loneliness compared to those in smaller towns or rural areas. According to Robert Putnam, author of Bowling Alone, the decline of traditional community structures and the rise of individualism have contributed significantly to this trend. We're no longer as involved in social institutions like churches, community centers, or even bowling leagues, the kinds of places where deep social bonds are formed. In many countries like South Korea and Japan, the intense pressure to succeed in the workplace has driven people into extreme isolation. The phenomenon of karoshi, or death by overwork, is a reflection of how disconnected people can become when work takes over their lives. When there's no room left for personal relationships, loneliness sets in. In South Korea, this problem has become so pervasive that the government has launched initiatives like single-person household support to address rising rates of loneliness among the elderly and young adults alike. Sometimes, loneliness is triggered by major life changes, moving to a new city, losing a loved one, or going through a breakup. These transitions can leave people feeling unanchored. When we lose our social support system, even temporarily, it can feel like the whole world is slipping away. If you're dealing with loneliness, this is crucial for you to hear. You might be thinking, sure, I feel lonely sometimes, but is it really that serious? The answer is a resounding yes. Loneliness doesn't just hurt emotionally, it has significant and serious effects on our health, both mental and physical. Loneliness can be as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Julianne Holt-Lunstad, a leading researcher in social isolation, discovered that loneliness increases the risk of premature death by 26%. Chronic loneliness can lead to heart disease, stroke, and even a weakened immune system. Studies also indicate that loneliness disrupts sleep patterns, making it harder for your body to fend off infections. Over time, this can result in a range of chronic conditions, including inflammation and cardiovascular disease. Loneliness is one of the strongest predictors of mental health issues like depression and anxiety. In fact, a meta-analysis by Harvard University researchers found that lonely individuals are more likely to develop symptoms of depression and experience suicidal thoughts. In countries like Sweden and South Korea, youth suicide rates are alarmingly high, with loneliness playing a key role in this trend. In older adults, loneliness has also been linked to cognitive decline. The stress associated with prolonged isolation can lead to memory problems, slower reaction times, and an increased risk of dementia. Loneliness doesn't just affect your mood, it alters your brain. Prolonged loneliness leads to the overproduction of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Elevated cortisol levels damage the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning. Over time, this can impair decision-making and problem-solving abilities. Neurological studies show that loneliness activates the same parts of the brain as physical pain. It's no wonder that people who are chronically lonely often report feeling worn out or drained by the experience. The more we understand the consequences of loneliness, the more urgent it becomes to address it. Because if loneliness continues to grow unchecked, the impact on global health, productivity, and social cohesion will be staggering. This is why you need to understand the impact of loneliness. So what happens if we don't do anything about this? What does the future hold for a world where more and more people are living isolated lives? If we continue down this path, we risk becoming increasingly fragmented. Social trust, our belief that we can rely on others, has already started to erode. A study by the Pew Research Center found that in the US, trust in neighbors and even friends is declining. When people feel disconnected from their communities, they're less likely to participate in civic life, less likely to vote, and less likely to engage in collective action. Some researchers argue that the rise of populism and political polarization in countries like the United States and Brazil can be partly attributed to a growing sense of isolation. When people feel disconnected, they're more likely to turn toward extreme ideologies for a sense of belonging. Loneliness is not just an emotional burden, it's an economic one too. A report by the Cigna Corporation estimated that workplace loneliness costs US employers more than $154 billion a year in absenteeism, lost productivity, and healthcare costs. In countries with aging populations like Germany and Japan, the cost of loneliness-related health conditions is expected to skyrocket in the coming decades. As more people experience loneliness-related health issues, healthcare systems worldwide will face increasing strain. Already, countries like the UK are grappling with overburdened mental health services that struggle to meet the needs of a lonely population. One of the most troubling potential outcomes of a lonelier world is the decline in empathy. Studies show that people who feel isolated are less likely to show empathy toward others. This creates a vicious cycle. As more people become lonely, fewer people are willing to reach out and offer support, which only deepens the sense of isolation. Now that we've explored the causes and consequences of loneliness, let's focus on what can be done about it. Loneliness is a multifaceted issue, but it's one that can be tackled on multiple fronts, by individuals, by society, and by governments. Let's dive deeper into how each of us can play a role in fighting loneliness and building more connected, compassionate communities. When you're feeling lonely, it's easy to withdraw and isolate yourself even more. Often, loneliness comes with a sense of shame or self-doubt that makes reaching out to others feel intimidating or impossible. But research shows that one of the most effective ways to combat loneliness is to make the first move, no matter how small it may seem. It could be as simple as sending a text to a friend you haven't spoken to in a while, asking a neighbor how their day is going, or even striking up a conversation with a colleague you don't know well. It's important to recognize that everyone experiences loneliness at some point, so reaching out doesn't make you weak or a burden. People often appreciate the effort, and you may find that they've been feeling just as disconnected as you. In fact, you could be the person who helps someone else break free from their own loneliness. We humans are social creatures by nature. We thrive when we have a sense of belonging, when we're part of something bigger than ourselves. But in today's individualistic world, it can be challenging to find that sense of community. That's why it's so important to actively seek out groups or activities that align with your interests. Whether it's a sports team, a hobby group, a religious community, or a volunteer organization, being part of a collective with shared goals or passions can foster a deep sense of connection. Studies have shown that people who participate in group activities, whether it's as simple as attending a book club or volunteering for a cause, report lower levels of loneliness. And it doesn't have to be about finding your best friend or forming deep, intimate bonds right away. Even casual connections like greeting familiar faces at a weekly event can give you the social support you need to combat feelings of isolation. One of the most overlooked aspects of loneliness is how we often blame ourselves for feeling this way. It's easy to get caught in negative self-talk, thinking, maybe I'm just not likable, or there's something wrong with me. But in reality, loneliness is a universal human experience. It's not your fault, and it's not a sign of failure. In fact, being kind to yourself can be the first step in breaking free from loneliness. Psychologists like Kristin Neff, a pioneer in the field of self-compassion, emphasize the importance of treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a friend. Instead of criticizing yourself for feeling lonely, acknowledge your feelings and remind yourself that it's okay to struggle sometimes. Take care of your mental and physical health by engaging in activities that bring you joy, whether it's reading, painting, going for walks, or practicing mindfulness. These small acts of self-care can help boost your mood and make you feel more connected to yourself, which is often the first step in reconnecting with others. Loneliness isn't just an individual issue, it's a societal one. To truly address it, we need to create environments where people can naturally connect with each other. This means designing neighborhoods, cities, and towns in ways that encourage interaction. Public spaces like parks, community centers, libraries, and town squares play a crucial role in bringing people together. These are the places where casual social encounters happen, the kind that might not lead to deep friendships right away, but can make you feel like part of a larger community. Think about cities like Copenhagen or Melbourne, which have been recognized for their emphasis on livability and community engagement. These cities invest in public spaces where residents are encouraged to socialize, from cozy cafes to open-air markets and pedestrian-friendly streets. In contrast, many modern urban environments are designed around cars, not people, which can make it difficult to build a sense of community. If we want to tackle loneliness at a societal level, we need to rethink how we design our public spaces. One of the most effective ways to fight loneliness is to teach people how to form meaningful connections, and it's best to start early. Schools should incorporate emotional intelligence and social skills training into their curricula. These programs can help children and teenagers learn how to communicate effectively, empathize with others, and build strong, lasting relationships. By teaching young people how to navigate their emotions and the complexities of social interaction, we can help them avoid feelings of isolation later in life. For example, in countries like Finland, emotional intelligence is taught alongside academic subjects in primary schools. Students learn how to manage their emotions, resolve conflicts, and build healthy relationships, which has led to lower rates of bullying and higher levels of overall well-being. Imagine if these skills were emphasized everywhere. If learning how to form deep connections was just as important as learning math or science. As we've seen with the UK's bold move to appoint a Minister for Loneliness, governments can play a direct role in addressing the loneliness epidemic. This position was created in response to rising concerns about social isolation, particularly among the elderly, and it has since inspired other countries like Japan to consider similar roles. A dedicated minister can coordinate national efforts to reduce loneliness, bridging the gap between mental health services, social programs, and local initiatives. But more nations need to step up. Governments should recognize loneliness as a public health issue and commit to developing comprehensive strategies for addressing it. This could include funding for community-building programs, grants for organizations focused on social inclusion, and national campaigns to raise awareness about the impact of loneliness on mental and physical health. For example, Denmark has been proactive in promoting hygge, a cultural concept centered around coziness and togetherness as a national value, encouraging citizens to spend more time in close-knit, supportive groups. One of the biggest barriers to overcoming loneliness is the lack of access to mental health services. In many countries, mental health care is underfunded and understaffed, leaving people without the resources they need to address feelings of isolation. Governments must increase funding for mental health programs, particularly for vulnerable populations like the elderly, low-income families, and young people. In countries like Canada and Australia, governments have already started rolling out telehealth services and online counseling platforms, making mental health care more accessible to those living in remote areas or those who might feel too isolated to seek help in person. Expanding these services globally could make a significant difference, especially in rural or underserved communities where loneliness is often more acute. In addition to providing counseling services, governments can promote group therapy sessions and peer support groups, which have been shown to be highly effective in reducing loneliness. These programs allow people to share their experiences with others who are going through similar challenges, creating a sense of solidarity and mutual understanding. The fight against loneliness isn't something we have to face alone. Whether it's making an effort to connect with others, fostering stronger communities, or pushing for governmental change, we all have a part to play. And the good news is, small steps can make a big difference. You need to watch this if you struggle with loneliness. Loneliness doesn't have to be permanent. It's something we can address and overcome. Whether you're feeling lonely yourself or know someone who is, there are steps we can all take to build stronger, more connected communities. So what if I told you that together we can change this? And before you go, make sure to subscribe to the If Saga channel. We're building a community where we talk about the big what-ifs of life, issues that matter. Share this video with someone who might need it, leave a comment on how you've dealt with loneliness, and let's keep the conversation going.